Eleanor Briggs, 51, stepped off the wagon with little more than a skillet, a bag of flour, and a quiet dignity life hadn't managed to steal, though it had tried time and again. The note said she was hired to cook for the Rutledge Ranch. Nothing more. And when she met Cal, Rutledge, widowed father of a quiet boy, he didn't offer a handshake or smile, just a glance and 5 flat words. "You're just here to cook." But that night, as the wind whispered through the cottonwoods, something unexpected happened. The boy Elias sniffed at the edge of her bread, like he'd forgotten what kindness smelled like. And Cal, who never lingered, stayed by the fire just long enough to finish the last crust. That was the first night. What followed were days shaped by silence, small acts, and the soft sound of healing rising like dough in a warm kitchen. But Eleanor's past the bruises, no one saw the losses. No one asked about simmered just beneath the surface. And Cal, he carried pain like a saddlebag he never unpacked. But bread has a way of opening locked places, and a woman's presence, when it's steady, not loud, can mend what the world left torn. So what happens when the man who swore he'd never love again tastes something that reminds him of home? When a boy says mama to the wrong woman and means it with all his heart? When the cook becomes the glue of a grieving family? What will he do when he realizes he's not just eating her food, he's beginning to need her? There's more to this quiet kitchen than warmth. There's a love story rising, and it just might be the kind older hearts have waited a lifetime to hear. Don't miss what happens when bread becomes more than bread, and love more than a word. Would you like to see the full story unfold? Let us know in the comments below. Should we tell the next chapter, or would you like more stories like this one? And if this quiet beginning touched you in any way, like, share, and subscribe to None. Wild West Saga for more stories that don't shout but stay. The high desert wind didn't whisper that. Morning it groaned. Dry mesquite branches scratched at the windows of the rundown ranch house, like claws on a coffin lid. And in the kitchen, Eleanor Briggs, age 51, stood in silence, her hat still on her head, her hands folded neatly at her waist. She'd come by stage 3 days ago with one satchel, 2 loaves of sweet cornbread she'd baked on the train, and a letter from a rancher named Cal Rutledge that said simply, "My mother's ill. We need someone to cook. Nothing else. Come if you can." There'd been no signature, no warm welcome when she arrived. Just a tired-looking man with dusty boots and a voice like creaking timber who opened the door, looked her up and down, and said flatly, "You're just here to cook." Eleanor didn't flinch. She had heard worse from men who beat her for burning the soup, from in-laws who said she was too old to bear children, and from life itself, which had taken everything and left her only with her dignity. In that moment, she looked at the stove, cracked and leaning, and said softly, "If I'm to cook, I'll need flour, butter, and patience." He grunted. "You'll have the first 2, not sure about the third." There were 7 others in the house, a mother with breath that rattled like a winter snake, a quiet child who peeked out from behind a wooden banister, and ghosts of something long undone. But Eleanor had cooked through grief before, stirred through silence, baked through shame. And that evening, when the smell of warm molasses bread drifted down the hallway, no one said thank you, but no one left the table hungry either. The next morning, Cal looked at her eyes, less stone, and said, "You make this every night." She met his gaze and replied, "No, just when I'm hoping something might start to feel like home." But what does home mean to a man who lost his, and to a woman who's never had one? The smell of bread lingered longer than the words. Eleanor Briggs began each morning before light touched the rim of the canyon. She worked without sound, her motions measured and clean, grinding cornmeal, boiling chicory, slicing apples so thin the edges curled like fallen leaves. Her hands had learned over decades how to move without needing thanks. Cal Rutledge didn't speak much after that first day. He'd nod sometimes when he passed through the kitchen boots, heavy with the weight of silence. Once or twice she caught him pausing by the doorway when the smell of cinnamon rolls crept through the walls. He never said he liked them, but he kept showing up around that time. On the 4th day, a small voice interrupted her peeling. "Miss Eleanor," whispered a boy no taller than her hip, "can I help stir?" It was Tommy, the middle child, with cold dark hair and fingernails stained from fence paint. He held a wooden spoon like it was sacred. She gave a quiet smile and handed him the bowl. Stir gently, like you're waking something up. From that moment on, the kitchen changed. One by one, the children began drifting in. Clara, the eldest, helped wash dishes without being asked. Maggie, only 5, started leaving wildflowers by the flower tin each morning. It wasn't loud, this reunion. It didn't shout or knock. It simply returned, like something old and warm that had once been misplaced. Even Cal began to linger longer. One evening, as Eleanor was kneading dough, he stepped beside her with a strange hesitance. My mother, she hasn't eaten this much in weeks. His voice was softer. Says your bread tastes like Sunday mornings used to. Eleanor didn't look up. Grief can starve a body, but love, it remembers to chew. That night at supper, Eleanor brought out a pot of stew so rich it fogged the windows. The children bowed their heads unprompted and murmured thanks. And in that silence, something invisible passed between them. Not quite words, not yet trust, but something like breath shared. But what happens when a wounded heart starts to hope again too early? Too soon, the snow came early that year. It laid itself over the hills like a woolen quilt stitched by a grandmother long gone, heavy, silent, and cold with memory. By December, the wind carved its own stories across the ranch windows, and the pipes groaned with the ache of deep winter. Eleanor Briggs stayed. Of course she did. She chopped wood when no one asked her. She patched little Maggie's boots with leather from an old saddlebag. She even found a way to coax a coughless sleep from Cal's mother tea brewed with pine needle mint and a single drop of honey on the tongue. But not all healing comes kindly. One evening after supper, Cal came into the kitchen hat in hand, looking more like a boy than a man. I saw the children made you a drawing, he said. She nodded. They call it our kitchen now. He looked down. That's the thing. It's not. You're just here to cook. That's what I hired you for. Eleanor didn't flinch, but her hands, they paused mid-drying. I see, she said quietly. I didn't mean Cal began, but stopped. It's just, folks in town are talking. That maybe I brought you here for more than the kitchen? She nodded again, more slowly this time, and folded the towel with gentleness that felt almost defiant. Let them talk, she said. They need something to chew on. But I didn't come here to be wanted. I came to be useful. Cal looked at her, then really looked, and what he saw was not need or softness. It was a spine weathered and upright. A woman who'd known what it meant to be second choice and still showed up first thing in the morning. But the seed of awkwardness had been planted. That night, Eleanor took her supper alone by the fire, wrapped in quiet. The children noticed. So did the silence at the table. And Cal, he felt it in his chest. A tightness, a loss that hadn't even happened yet. When dignity meets fear, something has to give. But will it be her or him? The snow didn't let up, and neither did the silence. For 3 days, Eleanor kept to her rhythm, cooking, mending, tending. She never missed a chore, but her voice stayed tucked away behind her lips. The children tiptoed more. Even the fire crackled less boldly. But on the 4th morning, as the sun tried and failed to break through the clouds, Cal found a letter on the kitchen table. Just one sheet folded neat. No salutation, no signature. I've been useful before and still unwanted. I'll stay until the thaw, unless you'd prefer I didn't. That was all. He stared at the words, heart thudding like hooves in deep mud. And in that moment, he saw not just Eleanor, but his own mother 30 years ago, standing at that same stove, quietly saving the family with her biscuits and patience while his father drank away their pride. He folded the letter and stepped outside. The barn beckoned, but he turned toward the river instead, toward the flat rock, where his wife used to read aloud back when the children were small, and he was a different man. And there it hit him. Eleanor didn't need him to love her. She just needed him not to fear the way she healed things. That evening, he returned home early. No hat in hand, no apology rehearsed. Just a loaf of bread in his arms, one he'd tried baking from Eleanor's old notes she tucked in the pantry. It was lopsided, over-browned. He placed it on the table and cleared his throat. For dinner, he said. But if you don't mind, maybe you could show me how to do it better next time. Eleanor looked up from her stitching, and in her eyes was a softness, not forgiveness, not surprise, just the calm steadiness of someone who's seen winters come and go. And stays anyway. What happens when a man learns that healing doesn't mean weakness and love doesn't mean possession? It started with a knock. Not a polite one, but the kind that made the shutters tremble and the children freeze mid-spoon. Eleanor wiped her hands on her apron, but Cal was already striding to the door, jaw set. Outside stood Reverend Triggs, flanked by Hannah Bly, the town's most persistent gossip, and one of Cal's own cousins, Royce Rutledge, who hadn't visited since the funeral. Behind them, two horses shifted breath, steaming in the frigid air. "I heard there's a woman cooking here." Hannah began, looking past Cal. "A widow, alone, with the children." Royce chimed in. "Folks are saying you've taken in a stranger. Someone not quite proper." Cal didn't answer right away. He simply leaned his shoulder against the doorframe, like a man deciding what to keep and what to let go. Reverend Triggs cleared his throat. "Cal, I understand grief makes a man reach for what's near, but with the children so young and Eleanor's past, perhaps it's best to reconsider." Inside, Eleanor stood motionless. She hadn't known the rumors followed her even here. She hadn't known Royce still held a grudge from 20 years ago when she'd refused to marry him after her husband passed. She stepped into view. "I came to cook," she said quietly, voice low but steady. "Not to cause shame." But Cal raised a hand. "No," he said, looking at her, "not them. You came to help. And you did. These children sleep warm and eat well because of you." He turned back to the visitors. "I don't need a sermon or a cousin's blessing. If any of you think you can raise 7 children better, you're welcome to try." No one spoke. Even Hannah's mouth closed like a door finally catching on its hinges. Reverend Triggs removed his hat. "Very well," he said softly. "But folks will talk." "They always do," Cal replied. And Eleanor stayed quiet long enough. The door shut, not with a slam, but with a sure final sound. Inside, the children stirred. One by one, they crept toward Eleanor, not out of fear, but out of some deeper instinct. Her hands, now trembling slightly, were met by theirs. 7 small fingers, one quiet woman, and a man who'd finally drawn a line between judgment and kindness. What happens when the world questions something gentle, and the only answer is love lived out loud? That evening, the fire burned low but steady. Outside, the last of the visitors had long ridden off, swallowed by wind and dusk. Inside, the silence held not tension, but peace. Eleanor stood at the wash basin, her hands buried in warm, soapy water, though the dishes were already clean. She was trembling again, but it wasn't fear this time. It was the release that comes after too many years of being told to shrink herself. Across the room, Cal Rutledge poured coffee into 2 mismatched tin cups. He walked slowly toward her and set one beside the basin. "You didn't have to defend me," Eleanor said quietly. "I didn't," he answered. "I told the truth." She looked up, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she met his eyes and held them. Cal spoke again, softer this time. "They've had hot meals 3 times a day. They're laughing again. Elias even asked me to thank you for the way you don't rush him to speak." Eleanor blinked, unsure how to hold a compliment that had no strings. He continued, "You've done more for this house in a month than I managed in a year. I thought I was hiring a cook, but I was wrong." She gave a tired laugh. "That makes 2 of us." He paused, the words like smoke in his throat. "You can leave if you want. I'd understand. But if you stay, it doesn't have to be just the job." A long, quiet moment passed. Eleanor dried her hands slowly and turned to face him fully. "I've been someone's burden. I've been someone's regret. But I've never been someone's choice." She placed her hand lightly over his. "If you're offering that, then I'll stay." Outside, the wind rattled the barn door, but inside, a different kind of foundation settled, built not on obligation, but quiet mutual choosing. When kindness is offered freely and dignity is honored, could it lead to something even more enduring? Spring arrived quietly in the high plains, not in bursts of color, but in small permissions. A thaw in the creek, a calf born early, a window left open at night. In the Rutledge household, hope unfolded the same way, not in declarations, but in shared moments, each as tender as a warm biscuit passed hand to hand. Eleanor now rose before the sun, not out of duty, but peace. She moved through the kitchen with unhurried grace, braiding sweetness into the dough, laughter into the silence. Her hands had once been calloused by survival. Now they moved with care born of belonging. Cal had begun sitting beside her in the evenings, reading less, listening more. He still didn't say much. He didn't have to. He carried wood without being asked. He fixed the back step. He started carving a rocking chair, though he'd never carved before. "I don't need much," Eleanor said one morning, watching Elias run his fingers along the sill she'd dusted. "Just someone who notices when I've been quiet too long." "You've got that now," Cal replied without looking up. And she did. One Sunday, as the fields buzzed with new bees and softer air, Cal brought Eleanor a paper. It was the deed to the homestead. He'd written in the margins, "To Eleanor for all the things you've held together with just your presence." Her eyes welled. Not for the land, not even for the gesture, but for being seen, truly seen after a lifetime of invisibility. At dinner that night, Elias scooted closer to her at the table and said, "I told the boys at school you're my mama now." Cal looked up. Eleanor smiled, not the polite kind, but one that stretched all the way from her heart. She reached for Cal's hand under the table, and in that still golden moment, surrounded by warmth and quiet chewing and second helpings, she understood home had never been a place. It had always been a feeling, and now finally she was living inside it. In a house once filled with ghosts, love made room for bread, for stories, for second chances. Sometimes all it takes is a warm loaf of bread, and someone who sees you as more than what you do. Eleanor didn't come looking for love. She simply showed up, flower on her hands, kindness in her eyes, and a quiet strength shaped by years of being overlooked. But in the small acts, mending a hem, stirring stew, holding space for a grieving boy, she became the very heart the Rutledge family didn't know they were missing. And Cal, a man whose silence was once armor, found that healing doesn't always come with grand words. Sometimes it's in the presence of someone who stays. This story reminds us that even late in life, there are new beginnings. That even if the world has called you just a cook, just a widow, just a helper, you are never just anything. You are still worthy of love, still able to be chosen, still needed perhaps more than you know. If this story touched something quiet in you, please consider subscribing to None, Wild West Saga. Share this story with someone who needs a little hope, and let us know in the comments, would you like to see more stories like this, or a continuation of Eleanor and Cal's journey? We're here to tell the stories that linger, not loud but lasting.